first, I'm just going to go ahead and open it up and thank you all. First of all, I'm going to greet you properly with an Aggie Pride. So happy that you all have joined us this afternoon. Just for quick housekeeping, most of you are using an attendee role, so you are only in view only. You are in a view only mode, and all lines are muted upon entry. You may use the Q&A feature, and we ask that you only use the Q&A feature to pose your questions during the presentation. We know there's both a Q&A and a chat feature, and we ask that you please focus all your questions on the Q&A feature or your chats. There are some of you who are panelists who were assigned a panelist role, and for those of you on the call, if you see videos of anyone, those are who our panelists. So panelists, again, welcome, and we'll go ahead and get started. So without further ado, Ken, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Good afternoon, Aggies, and I certainly appreciate the time that you all taking with us this afternoon as we talk through the transition to a new alumni relations model for A&T. Certainly hope you all are well and slowly able to emerge out of this self-isolation period that we're in. But obviously things have not slowed down with the university throughout this period, and just as we sort of transitioned into a off-campus online learning environment, we are already making plans for coming back to business as usual, or in some form or fashion closer to usual in the fall. And so any of you have been around with the university since Chancellor Martin's arrival and been involved and staying connected, understand that we've transitioned to a lot of the organizations that support the university, as well as the university itself. We have gone through a major academic reorganization with elimination of some colleges and constituting new colleges and merging colleges. We have created a new real estate foundation, and we've created a new investment foundation. We have gone through a transformation of our athletic fundraising. As another piece of this and an ongoing evolution of the institution, it was time that we took a look at the integrated model that we had adopted about 6 or 7 years ago. So I want to talk to you about the sort of how we got to this point and the process that we used in order to make this decision and what that means going forward. And so, as you know, on the 24th of April, we did announce to the Board of Trustees during their meeting that we would move away from the integrated model that we adopted several years back, and then consolidate everything up under the Office of Alumni Relations. And by so doing that, it meant the dissolution of the Alumni Association as a separate 501c3 and replace it with an advisory council that would serve the same advisory role that the Alumni Association Board provided. And so as a result, that relationship will end on July 23rd when the A&T Alumni Association will dissolve. And that is in accordance with the UNC policy manual at the system level, as well as the memorandum of operating agreement or memorandum of understanding between the association and university, as well as the bylaws of the association. And so those assets that are held by the association will simply stay intact, and will move into the new philanthropic foundation of the university. Before we get started, though, anytime change comes along, and we know how difficult change can be, and making sure that people understand the change and why it has occurred, I want to certainly dispel a few myths. And one that always comes up is that we are taking these steps just to make it one more step closer to merging with UNC Greensboro. Well, I can tell you that's far from the truth. Those kind of conversations only come up outside of any official channels, and no one in an official capacity has talked about it. We are two very distinct universities, even though we are right across town from each other, with very distinct histories, very distinct roles and missions as institutions. us being a doctoral research land grant university, dictates one set of not only operating principles, but disciplines that we focus on. And UNCG, having its strong roots in being teacher education, teacher prep, is more in line with the liberal arts, and as far away from our role and responsibility as a land grant institution as it possibly can be. So let's dispel that myth right up front. The next is that, as part of this, we'll be eliminating alumni chapters, and of course, chapters remain at the heart of what we do. That's one of our main connections to alumni. That has a very strong history of not only engagement and connection in your own communities, but then support of the institution overall as well. And so, if anything, and we'll talk about that as we move through this is a move really designed to help bolster that relationship and streamline that relationship. And finally, that alumni will not have a voice in the new model. And again, this is one more opportunity for us to make sure that alumni do have a more direct say in the model and the things that we do going forth in alumni relations, because the chapters will now have a more direct line to not only the Office of Alumni Relations, but also to the Board of Trustees, the governing body of the institution, through the Advancement and External Affairs Committee, which oversees all of the affiliated entities of the institution, whether it's AAF, the Investment Foundation, the Philanthropic Foundation, Real Estate Foundation, any of the affiliated entities. And so all of those other affiliated entities on campus are very much more tied directly to the university in terms of staff support and programming and resource management. So I want to talk a little bit about where we are in the bigger picture with every institution of higher ed that has had an evolution of alumni relations and alumni associations. So as we started many years ago, institutions created separate alumni groups of some type, an association of graduates, an alumni association. They called them different things, but they were essentially the same things as an independent body of alumni that were designed to connect them as a family of graduates. However, that has steadily decreased over time for various reasons, and some of those are financial. Certainly the lack of or decline in dues paying memberships to a national organization. We've seen many of the programs that have had those kind of programs in the past begin to move away from those programs because while they depended on that revenue for their operations, they continue to see steady declines in paid memberships, as well as financial pressures from other things like waning affinity partnership revenues. If you remember some of the days gone by where there were credit cards that were branded with universities, there were marketing arrangements with various types of industry providers and others that provided significant revenue to alumni associations. And so between that's on the top end. The bottom end is obviously financial pressure of continuing to have to add more staff and pay more staff, while at the same time the revenues were continuing to decline. And so more and more of the institutions began to move towards an integrated model. They also were facing pressures from technology that has become a disruptor. I imagine everybody on here today has either a Facebook or a LinkedIn page and connects with people in those ways. And you can do that right in the palm of your hand, and you do it when you want to and how you want to, where you want to, and with whom you want to connect. And so it spans the geography that we needed 20, 50, 75 years ago as our main source of connection. And so, all those things have been compounding over the years to move many institutions away from an independent, separate 501c3 alumni association into an integrated model, which basically meant that the association was still there, but all of its, maybe not all of it, if it had an endowment and some other sources of revenue, but the majority of its funding came now from its institution that it was affiliated with in the terms of not only operating budgets, but also in terms of staffing. And so they, as a result, integrated their work into the offices of university advancement because of the synergies that can be gained by the connection of external relations with alumni relations and development and stewardship and advancement operations. And so they recognized that all of those things not only were closely tied to the success of one or the other, but the synergies that could be gained from that. And then, of course, as the universities began paying more and more of the bill for alumni relations operations, certainly they wanted to see a return on that investment. And so not only the desire for greater effectiveness to see that we are making headway in our relationships with our alumni in terms of engagement and memberships, or I wouldn't say membership, but involvement in activities and volunteerism. We'll try not to use the membership word because that sort of implies a dues paying model, but and then in terms of fundraising as well as a desire for greater efficiency, because we didn't want to maintain duplicate systems for each of those organizations. And so we are certainly not the first, and I doubt that we will be the last. Our neighbors across town, UNCG, recently made a similar move. Other institutions, Connecticut, UT, University of Texas, Arlington, it was one of the Iowa schools, Iowa State. So it continues to be one of those continued evolutions of alumni relations. And so we were no different when you look at our structure. If you look at this org chart on the right, all that staffing are university employees. Teresa has the good or bad, depending on how you view it, role of reporting to two different bosses. One to me as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Alumni Relations, and then to the Board of Directors of the Alumni Association. And so you can understand the challenges that always presents in terms of how you spend your time and priorities and goals and things like that. And of course, the association had a board of directors that did maintain their own assets, and still do until July 23rd. And those assets primarily consist of some operating dollars that are current use dollars, but primarily assets in endowments that support endowed scholarships, as well as what we call a quasi-endowment fund. It can be spent today, but it's invested and used and spent like an endowment that supports the National Alumni Scholars. However, again, with this move, the integrated model, the association did not have enough resources to continue to have their own staff. And so all the staff is university staff, and then all of the programs are really carried out by the Office of Alumni Relations. And so as we began this process to think about what does the future look like for alumni relations, and has this integrated model helped us achieve what we wanted to achieve, we began in some conversations with the board of directors of the association a few years ago, and as well as the Advancement External Affairs Committee, the Board of Trustees, and decided to engage a consulting firm to give us that independent assessment, not only of our staffing and structure and the programs and things like that, but around this integrated model and the concept of an integrated model. And so through a competitive bid process, we selected Alexander Haas. Alexander Haas had the required expertise that we were looking for in terms of a long history and support of the advancement function of universities, whether it's alumni relations, development, or advancement operations or external relations. And John Taylor, the senior partner who oversaw the project, has been in this business for a number of years, probably 30 plus years, and has been very engaged even at the highest levels with our professional organization. And to add to that, Alexander Haas also had a familiarity already with the university and its structure and its constituents and our programs. They did the work for us with our feasibility study and our readiness assessment for the campaign. And so when we began the engagement with the consultant, his recommendation was he wanted to do the initial assessment of the structure, looking at the staffing, all the documentation around roles and responsibilities and org charts and budgets and MOUs and those kind of things, as well as the understanding of the Alumni Relations Office versus the Alumni Association and how those two interacted and whether there was the synergy there that we were looking for. And then to conduct, after that assessment, to conduct what many of us know as a SWOT analysis, but they call a SOAR analysis or assessment, to look at where the opportunities and the aspirations are for alumni relations. And then ultimately to get us to a point where the University Advancement Team, the Alumni Association, and the Office of Alumni Relations came together to form a new multi-year strategic plan that we all agreed upon and would all have responsibility for. And so John engaged in his work in February, came to campus and interviewed Chancellor Martin, obviously the senior leadership team of the University Advancement, as well as the Alumni Relations team and the leadership of board members of the Alumni Association. After completing that work in February, John approached us in early March and identified two obstacles that he felt were really needed. He felt that caused us to have to modify the scope of the project and then to break it into at least 2 or 3 pieces and begin to look at the first piece of how wedded are we to the integrated model. Second piece could then move into the more of the SOAR or SWOT analysis, and then the final piece of the strategic planning. But he felt like until we got over this major hurdle, there was no point going forward with any strategic planning or assessment until we decided the future of the integrated model. And so what he discovered throughout that process was there was an ongoing lack of understanding of that model, internally and externally, particularly around people in the leadership roles who needed to be able to understand it because they're the ones that are establishing the roles and responsibilities and the goals and the outcomes. And then as I mentioned before, working for 2 different bosses and the challenges that creates, that continue to erode the relationship because of that confusion between Alumni Relations and the Alumni Association. And so, as I mentioned, John wanted to modify that approach and notified everyone. We all agreed that would be the best step forward. And so John then began in earnest in March in interviewing all the Alumni Association board members, including members now of the Board of Trustees to get that higher level connection to the university, as well as some former Alumni Association board members and chapter presidents to make sure that he had a very good perspectives and varying perspectives to give him the recommendations for how we move forward. And so what he would produce at the end of that would be 2 things: a summary of his findings and observations, and then various recommendations for a path forward for us to deliberate on and make a decision on. And so he concluded that work and delivered his report to us in March. So some of the recommendations that John came up with in that report included a pretty broad spectrum. One could be to do nothing. We simply maintained the status quo and tried to work our way through it. Next would be to obtain some additional consulting help from an organizational development standpoint to try to remove that confusion and refine and better define those roles and responsibilities to build that synergy. Another was to simply maintain a bit of the status quo in terms of the structure, but to simply replace the board with others who may understand that integrated model and how the association and the Alumni Relations Office work together. but at the same time looking at the structure, the committees, number of board members, and those kind of things to refine some of those as well. The next one was certainly a recommendation, no matter what path we chose, and we all agreed with that, that we did need to make sure that roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. And then if we had to redo an operating agreement, to make sure that we recalibrated that, to make sure that we addressed those issues and observations that John came up with. The next would be to replace the Alumni Association with a commission. Would not have a governance or a fiduciary responsibility. And John used the term he's most familiar with from our professional organization. They use commission more than council. But that would be just an advisory board that creates a more direct link to our alumni and to our chapters. And then finally, just simply eliminate the Alumni Association because everything that was under the purview of the association is really already being done by the Office of Alumni Relations and could easily be absorbed by the staff that's already in place, and eliminate a lot of costs that could then be used to be put into programming, staff, communications, anything that could enhance alumni relations overall. And so after reviewing that report with the Chancellor directed me to form an ad hoc committee that would review that report and the recommendations and then recommend a path forward to him before the April Board of Trustees meeting. And so we assembled a very thoughtful group of well-respected and a diverse group of alumni that have been engaged with the university in various forms or fashion for quite some time, whether it's a member of the board of directors of the association, member of the chapter presidents, members of the board of trustees, members of the other affiliated entities around campus, and a member of the campaign cabinet for the campaign that we're in. And so after this group was assembled, and they of course wanted to see a lot of the same material that John reviewed during his engagement, but also reviewing the report and the recommendations. And certainly after very thoughtful deliberation and very thoughtful review and discussion, the committee did deliver a unanimous recommendation to the Chancellor on April 23rd. And that decision was that we did need to dissolve the integrated model and not only remove the confusion, but streamline our operations in terms of alumni relations and roll all of that up under the Office of Alumni Relations. And then as a result, that would dissolve the Alumni Association, but they didn't want to leave a void for alumni to have a voice in things going forward. And so replace it with an advisory council that would provide guidance and feedback to me and Teresa and her team around alumni engagement, the kind of programs that you would like to have, as well as communications. And so what you see in terms of the org chart doesn't really change from a university perspective. It just simply replaces that alumni association with the advisory council. And as you see, that's a non-fiduciary board. They won't control assets like the association did, nor will they have programs or staff or anything like that. It's just going to be an advisory group that works with Teresa and me and the alumni relations team. It's going to be comprised of up to 15 members that will be chosen by the Chancellor, and it's going to be chaired by a member of the Board of Trustees, the designee of the chair of the board. Those members are going to serve 2-year terms, and they will meet quarterly. And then the criteria that we're going to use to select them are going to be critical as we put this group together to make sure that we not only represent the entire spectrum of our alumni body, and that's through gender diversity, geographic diversity, generational diversity. But we also can be looking to make sure that, number one, they're an alumnus of the university, because that's who this is designed to be the voice for. We want to make sure that they have provided a track record of financial support to the university. And it doesn't have to be a significant level. We know not everyone's a $100,000 or $1 million donor, but we do want to make sure that those people have at least supported the university in a meaningful way, each into their own means, as we like to say. And then a record of prior service to make sure that these are people who have already served at a chapter level, or they've served on an advisory council to one of the colleges. They've been an engaged volunteer in alumni relations activities. It can be a myriad of things, but just to show, number one, that they not only are an actively engaged participant, but that they have a good track record of their service, and that they have added value rather than taking anything away from it. And so those are going to be the criteria that we'll use to select this advisory council. So we immediately began setting about developing the charter for the advisory council to make sure that they understand clearly what their roles and responsibilities are, as well as that criteria that we just talked about for member selection, and then job descriptions for those council members. And then developing a nomination form, because come June 1st, we want to be able to roll out a call for nominations, because again, and get this to as many people as we can, because we do want everyone to have an opportunity to be nominated for this Alumni Advisory Council. And then we'll review those nominations to make sure they meet the criteria we established and that we just talked about, and then recommend probably a group of 20 to the Chancellor and the Board of Trustees Advancement External Affairs Committee Chair for review and final selection. So we would expect them to pick up to 15 of those people for the new council. And then in July, we would notify them and confirm their service, make sure that they are willing to serve, and then have that group announced by July 23rd, so that there would be no gap in coverage between the date that we will be ending the relationship with the association and moving into an era of an advisory council. And their first meeting of this group, we would certainly expect them to begin sitting down and working with Teresa and her team on not only assessing engagement needs, because we want to make sure we hear directly from you as our alumni, what exactly you want in the relationship with the university, and what are your needs as an alumnus. And we have proposed 10 or 12 different programs that I think you'd find interesting and very meaningful to get involved with, whether we're talking about offering lifetime career services to alumni, or a legacy program for the university, or a grandparent universities where you could come on campus and bring your grandchildren and see what it's like to be on campus for a weekend, and a lot of different things that can not only help from a service to you as an alum, but also that can build an enrollment pipeline for the university, a fundraising pipeline for the university, and an engagement pipeline for the university. And so begin asking questions of you all, what you would like to see, and then begin to set some goals for the new programming, new communications, new activities, to then begin assessing what we will judge as success or failure. And whether that's growth in chapters, whether that's growth in engaged alums, new programs, communications, evaluations, any of those kind of things, to begin helping assist with how we know we're making progress in alumni relations. So as I say we, the ad hoc committee, talked about the reasons for doing this. Number one, again, removing that the confusion out there between what role the association played versus what role the Office of Alumni Relations played, and create a more direct link to the alumni chapters, as well as a stronger link to the leadership of the university and the Board of Trustees, and through the Advancement External Affairs Committee, of which Chancellor Martin is a member. And not only for that clarity and consistency of purpose and expectations, but also to make sure that it is in line with all the other affiliated entities of the university, and that we're not only building synergies there, but certainly making sure we're not stepping on each other's toes when it comes to alumni engagement, because each organization has its specific purpose or its lane, if you will. We want to make sure everyone is not only staying in those lanes, but also maximizing what they add to this bigger picture equation for alumni engagement overall. And then some cost savings. As you can imagine, anytime you run a separate organization, you all know there are costs, whether it's of the audits that have to be done every year and audit services, travel for board members, the costs of meetings, the cost of legal services, insurance, all those kind of things are cost savings now that can be poured into more direct programming, staff to support programming, communication, those kind of things. And as mentioned earlier, it allows the staff to focus on delivering support to alumni without that distraction. Trying to run another organization at the same time, you're trying to run alumni relations and planning for meetings for the Alumni Association Board and reports and all of those kind of things. So that kind of streamlines that or removes that duplication of effort as well. And then going to give us some more opportunities to engage alumni how, when, and where they desire. Like I mentioned before too, you can do it in the palm of your hand now, since we're all carrying around many computers in our hands. And as we look to engage alums, there are other ways that we have quite frankly neglected, and that is maybe alumni that want to connect around a certain extracurricular activity, whether it's former band members, former Greek life, members. Well, I guess you can't call them ever former Greek life, right? You're always involved in that. But athletes, people who work for the same company, people who work in particular industries or a certain career path, and so allows us to build more connections around those opportunities as well. And then our ultimate goal, when we talk about and we describe alumni relations for A&T, our overarching goal is always to connect you to each other in your own communities, because it's important that you all know that you're in a community of fellow Aggies, whether you're in New York, whether you're in Dallas, or whether you're in Atlanta, but then also connect you back to Greensboro, because that's the home of the university, and you're part of a greater family of everyone who came through A&T at some point. And so it's critical that we make those kind of connections. So one of the biggest questions we get is, what does that mean for chapters? And for chapters, we expect you to see business as usual. All the things that you're doing now can certainly continue, whether it's your meetings, your officer elections, scholarships, new student send-offs, all the things that you have always been doing. That is going to continue and will always continue. And then, of course, our annual meeting is next week, May 20th. So we hope you will join us for that meeting to hear not only from the association leadership, but also the chancellor and others. In terms of some things that we will have to do for next steps for the chapters is certainly as part of the transition plan, Teresa and Crystal and their teams have already begun putting that plan in place and acting on it to update the handbooks, make sure that they're looking at the programming pillars that are in place now, redefining any financial processes and scholarship operations, any of those kind of things. Because I think two of the biggest ones we've already begun to address, we know that chapters have incorporated the association into their name. And so the mark and the name will certainly have to change. And Teresa and her team are working on that now, as well as the fact that we will roll the assets of the association into the new philanthropic foundation, and knowing that chapters are under the umbrella of that EIN for your operations and your banking needs, we will roll those into it as well, through what's called a group exemption, to make sure that you're still covered under the group exemption for the new philanthropic foundation. And Teresa and Crystal and their teams will be there to help walk you through that step by step, but we don't expect any gap in coverage from that standpoint as well. So there's a lot to talk about, a lot that still has to be done. And we're certainly going to answer a lot more questions this afternoon, but as anytime you have any questions or you think of anything you want further clarification on, feel free to use that alumni@ncat.edu email address. you know how to get hold of Crystal, Teresa, or me. So certainly don't hesitate to give us a call. But I want to thank you all for taking the time this afternoon, particularly on Saturday afternoon. We know you could be doing other things unless you're still in lockdown, which I hope you're not. But it means that it's meaningful to you to be engaged in this conversation. So we do appreciate it, because I do want you to know that from Chancellor Martin to everyone involved, this was not certainly an easy decision. None of the decisions to make changes are easy, but we always do it with the best interests of those we serve at heart, and that's you, our alumni, because we want to have more of a direct connection to you, and you to have a direct connection to the university as well. And so I appreciate all that you have done for us in the past. We are we don't become the #1 publicly rated nor enrolled university by accident. It is by design, and it takes a lot of people, and you all are a very important part of that. And I know you will continue to help us as we continue that path towards preeminence and continuing to maintain that top spot. So thank you all very much, and I will turn it back over to Teresa for any questions you have.
All right, thank you, Ken. And again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. So this is how and then also a shout out to all our chapter presidents. So thank you, chapter presidents, for being on, and thank you for your leadership throughout all of this. So this is how we're going to approach our Q&A. We've had several questions submitted to us in advance. So we will address some of those questions first. Then we will go to our Q&A pool again. We know that there are two different queues attached to this particular webinar. So one is a chat, and then one is Q&A. We ask that you direct all your questions through the Q&A so that we're able to keep a handle on what's being asked. So if you would do that for us, we would certainly appreciate it. So without further ado, so let's take a look at some of the questions that we have received. So Ken, first question is, and I already had it highlighted. How does the new model for North Carolina A&T align with the other respective affiliated entities within the UNC system?
Yeah, you'll find a mix. Many of them have evolved much like us, unless they have historically had a much stronger membership model and to have the resources to remain independent. Probably the strongest in the system would be UNC Chapel Hill and their Alumni Association. The guy Doug Dibbert, that's run that for years and years. I've known him, and they have a very strong program, but it's been strong for 50 years. You'll find others that have moved away from either a standalone association or an integrated model. Again, much like UNCG just recently did. And you'll continue to find people who are working through the integrated model. When I was at NC State, as Associate Vice Chancellor for Development there, we integrated the Alumni Association into the university. And so they are still operating under an integrated model. So you'll find, again, depends on the sort of where each institution is at in that relationship, you will find a representative sample of each.
Okay, so under the new model, what are some of the specific ways the university will establish a closer relationship with alumni that was not available under the current National Alumni Association independent structure?
Yeah, well, that's what we want to hear from you. That's where your voice is going to be important. As you heard me talk earlier, whether it's lifetime career services, whether it's different ways of communicating, whether it's a legacy program, we want to know first and foremost what is on your mind and what you want in that relationship. I don't know that that's ever been done before, and so before we set out to build new programs or new communication channels, we want to make sure that that is a priority for you as well. And as we build those, that's what we're going to focus on. And then we'll continue to keep that list of about a dozen things and hopefully grow upon that. But But there's some very interesting ones in there, and I hope we can get around to all of them at some point.
Okay, the next question is, what is the greatest challenge facing the branding, acceptance, and impact of the new Alumni Relations Council?
Yeah, the first biggest challenge is really assembling the group. Because again, we want to have a broad call for nominations. That means there are going to be probably a lot of people being nominated for this council. And so you remember the criteria we talked about, making sure that not only do we vet them against that criteria, but then even once we do that, there may be 50 people that still would make good board members. And so, you know, then having to pick out of that 50, which 15 would serve on this council is going to be quite challenging, as you can imagine. But again, we want to make sure we've got diversity on there and we've got people who will be adding value to that. And again, these are 2-year terms, so it doesn't mean that people that don't make it the first time will not be included, you know, the next go round. And so we'll always continue to try to keep a pipeline of potential council members. And then the second piece is, the second challenge is going to be, you know, that conversation about what is most important for our alumni in terms of their relationship. I mean, we know everybody likes Alumni Reunion Weekend. We know you like homecoming and other things, but outside of that, what do you want most from us? Do you want us to help you with your programming at the chapter level to make sure that we get, you know, bright faculty out there to talk about some of the research they're doing, that we get some of our athletes and coaches out to talk about what they're doing from time to time, we get our deans out to talk, we get the chancellor out from time to time. So we're going to be looking to you all to help us fill that pipeline, if you will, of priority programs that we want to look at. And then last would be, then how do we go about implementing those, and how do we measure whether they are successful or not? You know, anytime you've got an organization like this, you always have to look at, you know, what programs have outlived their usefulness and maybe should be retired, what programs are doing well but need additional resources and could be beefed up, and then what are the gaps that we can fill with new programs. So we'll be going through that process with them, and those will be the biggest immediate challenges I would see for the new organizational structure.
Okay, how can alumni as individuals or through their chapters support the Alumni Relations team's goals, programs, and activities to spread the message to other alumni who may not be connected to what is going on?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you know, engage at your chapter level, right? And your chapter officers are the connection to the Office of Alumni Relations, and that feedback, and because we will continue to have an annual retreat for our chapter presidents and engage there. We want to get more engaged with succession planning and development at the chapter level with your officers, and we want to get, again, more engaged with your programming. And then out of that, along with advisory council and programming and communications plans that come out of there, would be the great opportunity to then not only engage with more alumni, but connect with more alumni through programs that maybe they've been looking for that they haven't been getting, or communications in a way that they haven't been getting them. Making sure that we leverage social media, email, direct mail, all the kind of channels that are out there at our disposal. And then you as individual alumni being an advocate. We got into a little bit of a conversation yesterday about people always ask me what makes a good alumnus of an institution, and I always tell them, you know, after 25 years in this business, I think there's really 4 pillars of that. And one is that you stay connected to the institution, right? Get involved. Find your passion, whether it was the college you attended, whether it was an extracurricular organization, athletics, Greek life, whatever it was, and stay connected and stay involved. The second one is give back. Again, you don't have to be a multimillionaire to be a philanthropist, but give back in what you can. And again, find an area that's meaningful to you. Next is support your athletic teams. We talk about student athletes and how they really put themselves out there to not only strengthen the the brand of the university, but strengthen the brand of your diploma as well, and give you bragging rights over the water cooler on Mondays too. Everybody loves to talk about the success of the athletic programs, and our student athletes are great ambassadors for the institution. And then last but not least is to be an advocate. Be an advocate whatever role that you can, whatever circles you travel in, whether it's helping recruit new students to the university, whether it is helping place graduates in positions around the country, but be that support network and advocacy network for your institution and your fellow graduates. Sorry, that was a long answer to the question, but I could probably talk more and more about all that.
Thanks, Ken. Will local chapters be able to use the National Alumni Chapters exemption under their tax ID, or will local chapters have to register and pay for their own tax exemption status?
Yeah, that's one thing we want to make sure we don't cause you to have to do, and that is file your own IRS tax ID number, because that then means you've got to do audited financial statements and informational tax returns and all those kind of things. And so I mentioned earlier that group exemption, you'll be rolled under the new philanthropic foundation under a group exemption and won't have to do all that work on your own. And Teresa and her team will help guide you through that process.
Will local chapters be allowed to use the National Alumni Chapters seal and logos for advertising, fundraising, paraphernalia, etc.?
Repeat that first part again. I didn't catch that.
Will local chapters be allowed to use the National Alumni Chapters seal and logos for advertising, fundraising, paraphernalia, etc.?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're also working on is a new mark, if you will, for this, for chapters and that chapter network, as well as a name for that network, and allow you to have that mark and that name to use whatever form or fashion you want to. And then, of course, with university approval ahead of time, we always can get the university, the interlocking A&T and any other marks used as well, as long as we get prior approval for those.
Will this change result in more oversight of the chapters by the parent organization?
Not more oversight. I would hopefully describe it as more support, for the things that you're doing at that level. Certainly, we want to make sure that there's consistency and clarity in the way that we operate among the chapters, and that no one is certainly straying from any IRS guidelines or legal issues that would cause any trouble either at your level or the university level. But I wouldn't describe it as oversight.
There's a long preface to this question, so I'll just get to the question.
Okay.
How will the Office of Alumni Relations address or assist alumni chapters to respond to the greater emphasis on STEM-related programs to the detriment of non-STEM students?
Yeah, I think, and maybe that's one of the things I'll ask Chancellor Martin to address in the annual meeting. But if you hear him talk, I know we're always described as a STEM institution, right? Because engineering is always key in a land grant university. Every land grant university you find, you're going to have typically engineering, agriculture, and business. But that is not to the detriment of the arts and the liberal arts, right? And if you go back and read Justin Morrill's original legislation for the Morrill Act, then it's very specific in there that it is not to the detriment of the arts and the liberal arts. And so we are doing more and more to promote the arts. We had a great town and gown event last year that brought in the community, featured just immensely talented students that we have who, could be an electrical engineer, but they can sing like nobody's business, right? And act. And so we do have a lot of talent on campus, even though we've got a lot of bright students who may be studying the STEM areas. But as the chancellor has directed to the provost, when we look at hiring new deans for the colleges that we would consider the liberal arts, whether it's you know, the arts, humanities, social sciences, and other things, that they have the same expectations as the deans and the faculty of our other colleges, and that's around the things that are core to the land grant mission, and that is education, research, extension, engagement, and economic development. And because there are opportunities in all of those, whether you're in the College of Education or College of Engineering. And so, you know, if you're talking to me and you're talking to Chancellor, I know others that I sit around the table with, we don't see it as just a STEM institution. We understand that it's got a recognition as a STEM institution, but we are pushing education and humanities and arts and social sciences as much as we're pushing anything else. And when you look at enrollment numbers, I would tell you that's where we're seeing the largest increase in enrollment as well. And so it would be harmful for us not to recognize that and engage in that kind of way as well.
Will the regional structure remain intact?
Yeah, we're still discussing that, and I think that's going to be one of the first questions for the advisory council. We know we have regional directors on the Alumni Association board now, and so we'll want to have a discussion about whether everyone found that helpful or harmful, either creating another layer of bureaucracy or actually helping communications and organizations and programming. So we will again be looking to you all to help us clarify that and answer that question.
Okay, a couple more questions from our advanced questions, and then we'll hit the Q&A queue. Will a new chapter guidance document with updated policies and procedures be produced and provided to chapters by the Office of Alumni Relations?
Yes, that was one of the things we covered in the presentation, that Crystal and her team will be working on the chapter handbook, making sure that that is updated as needed. Again, pillars of programming and all those other kind of things. So that's absolutely one of the critical items on the transition plan.
Will individual donations by chapter members be counted towards chapter participation during fundraising campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only do they get rolled up into the overall campaign, but we continue to capture affiliations with chapters so that we can roll up individual alumni into chapter totals and report those totals out.
Will chapters still be able to purchase home football tickets early and as a group?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's one of the things you heard me talk about, the 4 pillars of an alumnus, and that is supporting your sports teams, right? So that part of that means not only cheering them on over the water cooler, but sitting in the stands and cheering them on. So we absolutely encourage it.
Okay, so we're going to move to our queue. There's a question about how will copies of the presentation be made available. The presentation will be sent to all chapter presidents to distribute to the chapter membership. So this presentation will become available, as well as another opportunity to submit questions. While we have here on the screen to submit, there's one way to submit questions through at alumni at ncat.edu, but we've also created a separate portal for questions as well. So that will be disseminated after this meeting. Question, can you talk more about the name change and deadlines?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know about deadline right now. We certainly would like to have it in place by July 23rd, but the name change will simply involve, the removing the mark that is the Alumni Association mark, and if association was included in your name, if it was the such and such chapter of the North Carolina A&T State University Alumni Association, that would have to change, and so Teresa and her team will walk you through that as well. But we do want to have that in place when the association goes away. But I don't have a specific deadline for that yet.
Let's see. One slide mentioned updating the handbook. What about our bylaws?
Yeah, I'd look to Crystal and her team to help you with any bylaw reviews, and changes that you feel need to be made or will have to be made for that.
Okay, all right, this also has a preface statement. So let me just read through it, Ken,
Okay.
bear with.
Sure.
One deficiency which could easily be turned into a positive opportunity is that as alums is our inability to have a concise and accurate contact database. We used to update the Aggie directory every 5 or so years. That's the Harris Publishing Directory, I believe, that they're referring to, Ken. Are there any plans to either update or improve the alumni contact database?
Yeah, I would love to. As Teresa mentioned, Harris was the giant in that industry with all alumni organizations over the years and published the printed alumni directories. And what has happened is, technology has disrupted that business too, because the minute you publish that thing, it's outdated. And it's usually very time consuming and it's costly. And so what Harris has done and others now, because they have the similar platforms, is moved to an online directory. And so it's certainly something we've talked about and looking at various platforms to do that. That allows you to have live access to be able to update that so that it's as accurate as whatever you provide us, and however accurate or how timely alumni keep that information updated if they move positions, get promotions, move to another company, move to a new industry, things like that. So if and when we do it, it would be more of an online directory rather than a printed directory.
Okay, the next one. I would like to see improved relationships between the university and affinity groups. How will affinity groups be engaged? There are other groups besides the chapters that should be addressed.
Yeah, we're going to encourage affinity groups because we already have certainly seen the rise in the ladies of A&T and how quickly that has grown and the force that has become. The Aggie Gents have become a force for fundraising and engagement as well. And so as you heard me say earlier, people connect around affinity. And so we're going to encourage both connections. There's no reason they can't come to a geographically based alumni chapter meeting, but also then connect with fellow Aggie attorneys or fellow Aggie doctors or fellow former band members. And so we will certainly engage with those affinity groups and work with those affinity groups, but at the same time encourage them to get engaged with the chapter as well.
Okay. That is all from, have one more.
Okay.
After July 23rd, 2020, how should local chapters move forward with business operations since it has been advised to remove XX chapter of NCAAT?
Yeah, well, it's because we do want to have the new mark and the new name in place so that you don't have a disruption there. So we're already working on that. So that hopefully come July 24th, you've already made that transition and it's a seamless transition from the 23rd to the 24th.
Yeah, and to add to that, so we know everyone has the beginning of the name. So say, for instance, Twin City Alumni Chapter or Queen City or Houston Alumni Chapter. So those beginnings we want to try to maintain as much as possible. It's the second part of that name that we're looking to update, which now says of the North Carolina A&T State University Alumni Association Incorporated. That's the part that we would need to modify. So the first part we are hoping that can be maintained for your chapters, and then find another part to the find another identification for the second part of that name. Let's see. So this is, Ken, this question is related to the constituent chapters that the Alumni Association identified in their bylaws, and we have one right now, the Alpha Nu Alumni Network. And when you were speaking about affinity groups, that is one of those groups. The previously titled constituent chapters formed under the previous Alumni Association constitution and bylaws, how would this affect those type of affinity groups?
Yeah, we would just recharter them under the new organization, much like we would do any new affinity group that would come online.
Let's see, and let me scroll through the Q&A and see if there's anything else that could be covered. Everyone, as we've gone through these town halls, we found certain themes to questions. So we were fortunate enough where we're able to capture those questions throughout. And so those are some of the questions that I'm scrolling through, but I think, Ken, I think we're good at this point.
Okay.
Yep.
Teresa, there's one more question.
Oh, there is? Okay. Scrolling down.
At 503.
Gotcha. Many alumni chapters were beginning to embark on establishing an endowment. Will that process change?
No, it won't change. It'll just now be done under the Philanthropic Foundation rather than the Alumni Association.
And I can help answer this, Ken. Will the revised handbook online for this? Okay. Will the handbook be available online for distribution and review? I added to that question a little bit. So yes, we are in the process of updating the handbook so that it will apply to the target environment, and it will be made available just as it has either hard copies, or we will provide soft copies to all of our chapter presidents, and they will in turn can share with the membership. So yes, the revised handbook will be available on as many channels as we can make it available. All right, I am scrolling to the bottom of the Q&A, and I'll say it one more time. I think that's it, Ken.
Okay, well, and if we have missed a question or something, by all means, again, you know how to reach us, and you can use the alumni NCAAT.edu that's up there on the screen. So feel free to use that as well, because we certainly want to make sure we answer all your questions. So again, in closing, I would just say thank you all again for all that you have done, all that you continue to do at your levels. We don't pay you nearly enough to do what you do. But maybe we can give Christmas bonuses this year. I don't know. But we're hoping to get back to operations as normal this fall. And we certainly hope to see all your smiling faces sometime on campus in the very near future. So I'll close by saying Aggie Pride, and you all stay safe.
Okay, Ken, I just got a text. Someone had one more question, so hold on a second. So we have to unmute them. This is coming from Tanya Reed, I believe. So let's see.
Can you unmute Tanya? She's a panelist. I can see her.
Yeah, I just unmuted her.
Okay.
All right, Tanya, you have the floor. Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My question is regarding a repetitive message I've heard during this call, which is that you really want to know what we want as alumni. So will there be a survey done to go to alumni throughout the country? How will you find out what we want?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we've talked about various survey methods, perhaps some focus groups and other things that we would do to help either open-end questions that allow everybody to just generate their own, or provide some and rank them, and then offer some open-ended ones so that people can tell us what they really would like for us to consider. And so, yeah, we'll be working through all those kind of tools to make sure that we capture all that, see where the real priorities kind of fall out and all that, and then work to build those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Kent, I guess I was premature in closing out the meeting. We have one more person who has their hand raised. Toriano Franklin. So I'm gonna click here. All right, Toriano, you are on.
Hi, hopefully I'll be last. Just one final thing, in case some chapter members didn't get a chance to join in the webinars. I know you got frequently asked questions prepared. Could you send those out? I would like to send those out along with the presentation for folks who just weren't able to join. And I know all these are being recorded. Will you send one of these that are recorded out as well?
Yes, so we will review all of the recordings and make sure that we have a full recording, and yeah, we can share that as well.
Yeah, and we also, Toriana, thanks for the question, have just an open letter to kind of all alumni that we're working on as well that would accompany all that. So
that's perfect.
And so hopefully we'll have
those video recordings.
We
use the one that makes me look the thinnest and the youngest.
There you go.
I don't know if we have a lens for that. That just ain't gonna happen.
No, I've joined a few just to support some of the members from my chapters. So I think you did a great job, and I appreciate the information and time. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that is it. So thank you all. Just to echo Ken's comments in terms of, we appreciate you taking your time out on a Saturday afternoon to be with us and allowing us this opportunity to discuss in further detail the changes, the transformation of the alumni relations model at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. We are here to assist. We are here to support. We are here to engage. We are here to answer questions. So please feel free to continue to reach out to us, and we will be happy to continue the dialogue and continue to provide you the information you need to share in your respective alumni networks as we move towards this new chapter in alumni relations at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. So I will bid you farewell the same way that I greeted you. I hope you all are safe, remain safe and healthy, and Aggie Pride.